Hi, everyone. I'm Heather Culkin, and I am one of the co-chairs with Lais Fleury, who's also in the room here. And we are the co-chairs of Nature for All USA, and we want to welcome you to our dialogue today. And if you would like, we invite you to put your name in the chat or put where you're calling in from in the chat and any information you'd like to share with the group, so that we can find out who all is here and get to know each other a little bit. So welcome, and I will turn it over to Natalie from IUCN.
Thank you so much, Heather, and welcome everyone. Um, as Heather mentioned, please drop in the chat where you're calling in from. If you'd like to share one lesson that you learned from nature as a child in childhood, we'd love to hear your thoughts and get, your thinking flowing to frame the conversation. So I'm honored to be moderating today's discussion and to hear from our guests about their work around the world using a rights-based approach to ensuring children's access to and connection with the natural world. So I'm a program officer with IUCN, supporting IUCN's Commission on Education and Communication. It's a network of 1,500 volunteer professionals, educators, experts, and students from around the world who use education and communication to advance environmental conservation efforts globally. IUCN's Commission on Education and Communication, the CEC, along with the World Commission on Protected Areas, leads the Nature for All initiative, which is a global movement to inspire the love of nature, especially in childhood. The CEC has also been recently advancing a nature-based education initiative, so bringing nature back into the core of learning and restoring our connection with nature, again, particularly in childhood. Governments, organizations, and individuals are increasingly aware of the critical role that education plays in the trajectory of the twin crises of climate change and biodiversity loss. And as education systems evolve, there's a complementary and growing recognition that our connection to nature in the face of urbanization and environmental change needs to be restored. IUCN has long recognized the significance of this connection through several resolutions and policy positions, and including one resolution that's particularly important for today on the child's right to connect with nature and to a healthy environment, which states that connecting children to nature as part of their everyday lives in meaningful ways tends to be a precursor to their growing up as adults with passion and commitment to work actively to support the conservation of the environment and natural resources. So with that framing, I'm so pleased to introduce our two speakers today who will share how they are advancing children's rights to nature around the world and how really upholding these rights is a climate solution. So I have with us here today Ryan Spencer, who's the executive director of the Comal County Conservation Alliance in the US. Ryan lives in Fisher, Texas with his wife, Katie, and he spent his career working to protect the natural resources of his state. As a park ranger, program director, development director, and executive director, Ryan has seen firsthand how nature can transform lives. He believes that children in nature movement can reach across partisan divides and bring people together to create a more sustainable future and to cultivate the next generation of environmental stewards. Ryan is a doctoral candidate at Texas State University, where he's pursuing a PhD in aquatic resources and integrative biology. I'm also very honored to have here on the call today Saher Rashid Baig. She is the co-lead of the Children's Rights and Minors Engagement Working Group at YOUNGO, which is the official children and youth constituency of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. Saher has been advocating for rights-based climate and environmental policies through various UNFCCC thematic agenda items. For example, Action for Climate Empowerment, or ACE, gender, and the global stocktake. She has 7 years of experience amplifying children and youth voices at climate negotiations. Saher has been previously leading on the human rights and national determination working group under the constituency. She's currently studying international relations and European politics in Czechia. So wonderful to have you both with us, Ryan and Saher. I'd like to, before we dive a little bit deeper learning about Ryan and Saher's work and their organizations, we'll share a brief video to set the stage that really highlights children's voices in demanding urgency on climate action. So this short video, The Important Stuff, was produced by the Alana Foundation and UNICEF and captures testimonies from children and teens across 9 different countries around the world on how the climate emergency has affected their lives. The video was aired at COP28 last December in Dubai for thousands of world leaders and tens of thousands of COP participants. So I'll share my screen and play the video and set the stage for today.
The volume doesn't seem to be working, Natalie.
Okay, we have a little bit of a volume issue. I think it doesn't seem to be playing. Let's see. I wonder if I start again.
No, when you share your screen at the bottom, there should be a little share audio as well. You might have to reshare your screen.
Okay, I'll stop sharing. And I will reshare. Okay.
There's an advanced option sometimes that takes you to audio.
There we go. I think you're seeing my screen now.
Yeah.
Yes.
Perfect.
I've heard about it only once, but I'm not really sure what they do.
Control climate change.
It's a lot more hot. Tô queimando aqui na frente da minha casa, bem aqui.
waxaynu saameeyeen abaartii oo kale biilaan ayaa nagu dhacday waxaan dareemay baahi iyo cabsi weyn
jer je sve bilo drugačije tada kad se desila ta poplava. Morali smo da se iselimo iz domova, da idemo u druge gradove.
I wish I could say yes, but no.
dadka waaweyn cimilada waxba ma aysan ka qaban.
فلوس كتير لكن زمان لو كانوا عملوهم من بدري كانش يحتاج كل المبالغ دي.
I bet all they do is fight about, I think we should do this. No, I think we should do that. No, I actually think we should do this. Se vocês continuarem queimando, a gente vai morrer nesse calor.
E فبيت كتسكايت no tenen que se sair naquela carambola e tum sei te meto fumeka ou sair na tika.
Stop fighting for once and let's focus on the important stuff. يحاولوا أكتر شوية
طبعاً لو ما اتخذنا إجراءات لتغيير المناخ راح ندفع الثمن في المستقبل.
Well, no offense, but you guys only have a few years left to live. And meanwhile, I'm 11. I have my whole life to live, and I want to live it.
Adultos, se vocês estão lembrando, vocês têm que cuidar das crianças. وأن نحن لازم نحافظ على بيئتنا، لأن هذا كوكبنا نحن، ونحن لدينا المسؤولية لكي نحافظ عليه.
Stop talking about and actually do it.
Klimatske promjene su mnogo moj život.
Okay, so now that we've set the stage with that really powerful message, really powerful stories from children all over the world, again, that was shared with thousands of leaders at COP last December. I'd love to now I'd love to ask Ryan Spencer again to tell us a little bit more about his work in Texas, including some of the recent work on the passage of the Children's Outdoor Bill of Rights in several cities in Texas. So Ryan Spencer, welcome, and looking forward to hearing more about you.
Wow. Well, nothing wakes you up quite like the truth of children. That is an amazing video, and thank you for sharing it. I also just want to mention this is my very first ever interaction with IUCN and Nature for All. I'm honored to be here. I'm grateful for all of you all over the world doing incredible work. And, you know, it's really interesting. The children, they just get it. They're more connected. They're grounded. They understand. They see what's happening. And it's funny, I was in a conversation yesterday with a councilwoman in South Comal County who's fighting an expansion of a quarry, an aggregate mining expansion, 1,000 acres, 7.4 million tons of aggregate every year out of that quarry. And the fighting is real. The fighting that Sadie described in the video is absolutely real. I'm going to share my PowerPoint slide real quick, and hopefully I can figure out how Zoom works. That would be wonderful. So let's see. I guess it would be on the bottom of the thing. Share screen. Got it. There we go. I also just want to mention real quick, I see Gil Penalosa is on the call. Wow, that's huge. I remember watching Gil's presentation at the Children in Nature conference and thinking to myself that, you know, one of the smartest guys on the planet. So thank you for being here and for listening to me talk. This is who I am. This is a little bit about me. That's me as a kid wearing a life jacket in one of our many lakes here in Texas. Jumping into the Devil's River, that's my dog Butters, and this is me sitting in a grotto, collapsed grotto in the Texas Hill Country. Hopefully y'all can hear me. I'm getting a little bit of feedback in my headphones, but so this is just my natural habitat, so to speak. I've spent most of my life engaged in the outdoors. I started when I was a young kid. My dad would take me and my brother out into the outdoors, and we would go camping every month for 7 years. And so that's really where my love of the outdoors came from. Whenever we have these conversations, I honestly think that it's just important to acknowledge that somebody took us into the outdoors, and that's where this passion for the work really comes from. You are all totally aware of this, that the Children in Nature movement is changing the way that we think about conservation. In the United States, the conservation movement is really driven by a lack of connection, the need for the conservation movement. You guys are aware of how polarized things have gotten in the United States. One thing that really brings us together is the recognition that our children are happier, healthier, and smarter when they get outside. These incredible infographics were produced by the Children in Nature Network. They just highlight some of the common sense things that we now know are real, that kids are happier, that they're stronger, that they have less stress, that they're more engaged in family life when they get outside. And it's one of those things, you look all over the state of Texas and it's harder and harder to connect with the outdoors. You know, we have a massive state. It takes a long time to drive east-west going across the state of Texas. And surprisingly, 85% of all the people that live in Texas live in 5 places. And so it's harder than ever to get connected with the natural world. One of the things that was really neat in my career is that I got to start out as a park ranger. And I was a wildland firefighter, first responder for Texas Parks and Wildlife. One of the most incredible park agencies in the United States. And my job was to manage a program called Texas Outdoor Family, where we would take kids and families out into the woods for $60, and we would teach them how to camp for a weekend. We'd give them all the equipment, we'd show them how to use it, and we'd help them connect with each other and the outdoors around them. And it was a game-changing program for me. You know, when I first started my career, I wasn't really sure how I would break into the conservation world. But one of the things that I realized while I was working for Parks and Wildlife was that nature has this incredible power to heal. And I was at Lake Ray Roberts State Park when I saw it for the very first time. There was a family recently struggled with a divorce. It was a dad and 3 girls. And when they got to camp on Friday night, you could just tell that things were not good. You know how it is when you start camping. It's dark, you're trying to set up the tent. There's a lot of stress. There's stuff falling out of the car sometimes. And, you know, they got the tent up and they got to bed and everything was great. But the next day, they were still at each other a little bit. You know, the kids were not happy with their dad. And we went through several different activities throughout the day. And what was fascinating is as we progressed from geocaching to fishing to kayaking, the kids started to loosen up a little bit. And the 3 girls, you had one in high school, one in middle school, and one in elementary school. We got down to the area where we were launching kayaks and they started splashing each other and laughing. And, you know, you could tell that they hadn't solved everything that they had gone through. All the trauma they had experienced hadn't resolved, but they weren't sad anymore. They were laughing. And that little spark of happiness gave that father all he needed to keep going. And so nature is just incredibly powerful for both children and adults. And that's really the impetus for all of my work in conservation, whether I'm talking to a mayor or a group of county commissioners, or I'm talking to a group of parents. It's how do we preserve this incredible world around us and what motivates us to do so. I started working after Parks and Wildlife with this incredible nature center in Central Texas called West Cave Outdoor Discovery Center. And I put the slide in there because this is something that you don't really expect when you think of Texas. I mean, I'm sure many of you think of tumbleweeds and cactus and horses and cowboy hats. You don't really expect maidenhair fern and beautiful crystal clear water and moss. That's not a thing you think about when you think of Texas. It was centered around the grotto, but really the work of the center was to connect kids with nature. And you could see several pictures on this slide of different programs that we employed. We have the Roadrunner Outdoor Adventure Bus, which lowered the cost of nature-based field trips all over Austin. Anybody who was a part of the Children in Nature Collaborative could rent the bus for their field trips, and it dramatically improved all of the nonprofits that were a part of the collaborative. This one up here on the top left is Girls Outside. It's a program that's still happening where we would connect young girls and girls who were just about to enter into high school, and they would do several field trips. And it was really designed around the outdoors. But what happened was this peer-to-peer mentoring that took place. It was just absolutely magical. And then lastly, we've got the Natural Leaders Network, which is a group of young professionals that are learning to tell their story and find their voice within the conservation movement. So those were just some incredible programs that we did in addition to passing the Austin, Outdoor Bill of Rights for Children, or COBOR. When we think about what it takes to pass a Bill of Rights for a large municipality like Austin or Houston, it takes a group of people. And, one of the first things that we did with the Children in Nature Collaborative of Austin was assemble a team, a group of organizations that all rallied around this idea that kids need to be in nature. And they weren't just conservation groups. Up here in the top left, you'll see this group called Newland Communities. You'll probably notice that. That's a land developer. That's a group of people that go out there and build residential communities, but they saw a great need to incorporate nature into their master plan developments. And so they joined the coalition. And this group goes well beyond the borders of Austin. You've got the Hill Country Science Mill, which was a part of our work. They're in Johnson City, which I know it may sound like they're right next to each other, but it's a good hour and a half away. In any case, the collaborative spirit, the collective impact model that we employed was absolutely critical to getting policymakers to take us seriously. It took years of advancing this collaborative work before we had the ear of the mayor, before we had an advocate on city council. And I just encourage anybody that's going to engage in this kind of work to really think about it from a team perspective. It's not about what your organization can do, your annual report, and the things you care about, the day-to-day of your work. It's really about how do we broaden our impact and increase it by working together. So again, this is a picture of the Roadrunner Outdoor Adventure Bus. At the time I wrote this slide, it was 5,000 kids connected to nature. It's gone over 12,000. It no longer exists anymore. The bus finally broke down, but it was an incredible testament to how collaborative the group was. We were raising money to support the programs of other nonprofits, which is absolutely fascinating and, speaks to the way nonprofits should work together. This was the day that we passed the Children's Outdoor Bill of Rights. So that is Steve Adler. He was the mayor of Austin. We've got Precinct 7 City Councilwoman Leslie Sweet, I think. Lisa, I don't know, Heather remembers her name better than I do. I left Austin several years ago. So this work happened for me in the early 20-teens. And then we also have the Parks and Rec director for the city of Austin, and of course the Roadrunners out there. The Children's Outdoor Bill of Rights is very simple. It's a non-binding resolution for the city of Austin that really just says that this is what we care about, right? And whether it's climbing a tree or catching a fish or a picnic in a park, you can read the list of items that we found of value in the non-binding resolution. But what was really neat about the Children's Outdoor Bill of Rights is that it was a commitment from the city to do everything it could. And so we started seeing various governmental organizations starting to work together around this idea that kids should get outside. Probably the best example that we have of this is the Austin Independent School District and the Parks Department for the city of Austin. They had several co-owned, about 33 co-owned facilities where the Parks Department actually owned the school's land, and then the school district owned the building on top of it. And so they hadn't met in 7 years, and then we passed the COBOR and they start having these conversations about, well, how can we green and beautify all of these school campuses? And then how can we open them up so that way people who aren't necessarily in school can enjoy these open areas? So, we say it's a non-binding resolution, but it was really interesting to see how after we made this commitment as a community, people started working together. This is more photos of our Natural Leaders Network. This is just a group of young people enjoying the outdoors, learning how to become leaders for conservation. Very special. And one of the things I'll mention about why this work is so critical is the enormous growth that Texas is facing. Right now, my county, Comal County, has 180,000 people in it. We're experiencing 175% population growth year after year. We anticipate that our largest city, New Braunfels, our county seat, will go from 100,000 people to 400,000 people in 25 years. And what you can see on the top part of this slide is the current build out of the Texas Hill Country. So we have San Antonio, we have Austin in Travis County up north, and then in between is Hays and Comal County. And right over there by that blue lake, that's where I live. And what you could see is over the next 50 years, massive amounts of people are moving to Texas because the economy is booming in our state. And our natural resources are under strain like no one has ever seen before. We're not sure where we're going to get all the water that we need in order to supply the people that are moving here. So the need for conservation in the state of Texas is greater than ever before. The need to connect kids with the outdoors is greater than it's ever been before. I'll add some notable things about the state. Right now, San Antonio is working on a Children's Outdoor Bill of Rights. Houston passed a Children's Outdoor Bill of Rights. Our largest, most populous county, Harris, passed a Children's Outdoor Bill of Rights. And frankly, theirs has a little more meat to it. They actually go into each item and describe how people can connect with nature. And so, I think I'll stop sharing my screen real quick. One thing I'll mention just about the work here in Texas is that the Children in Nature movement will define whether or not we succeed in the work of conservation. Because right now, as you can imagine, our state is incredibly polarized, like many of the states in the United States. And one of the things that brings people together, I can walk into an extremely conservative commissioner's court, and they will appreciate the very real need that children have in terms of access to the outdoors. They may not understand why we need to protect an endangered species or understand how we model for our groundwater supply, but they care about whether or not a kid gets to climb a tree. So again, I'm just so grateful to get to be here. That's my small little slide deck. Be happy to answer any questions that you have. And again, thank you for all the work that y'all are doing.
Thank you so much, Ryan. It's really inspiring to see all of your work in Texas throughout, the last decade or more, and just so much progress in assembling this amazing coalition of organizations working on children's rights to nature. Really bravo. And we hope that, the next decades are as productive on that front and as restorative on that front as they have been. So thank you. We're going to open it up to questions at the end of the presentation for both of the speakers. So now I'd love to ask Saher Rashid Baig to tell us more about her work with Youngo. She's been really busy at the various at COP28 last year. She was just in Nairobi for UNEA 6 in the past couple of weeks. So I'd love to hear more about your advocacy globally, ensuring children's rights to nature. So Saher, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Natalie, and thank you, Liz, and the team for the invite. I'm super happy to be here, and looking forward to the conversation that we will have. If I can please have my slide deck present on the screen, that would be great to take the conversation forward. So this, I hope that some of you probably know what Youngo is. If not, then don't worry at all, of course. This is what this whole conversation is going to be about. And if any of you is under the age of 35, then I would be really looking forward to seeing you in the constituency. So let's get started. Next slide, please. So to start with, as some of you might know that the youth momentum for climate change is not something that started just at 2018 or before that. Young people have been advocating to be part of climate policies and be part of right-based policies since many years before. And one of the constructive steps that were defined were in 1992 during the Rio Earth Summit, where children and young people got defined as the key stakeholders to achieve sustainable development, among 8 others, for example, women and gender and farmers and researchers. And then the timeline started for youth advocacy to be a formal structure under the UNFCCC, that is the United Nations Framework Convention for Climate Change, so that the young people and children have a specific place for their advocacy, for their voices to be integrated in the climate policies that are formed and affect and have a great impact on the future of children and young people. So in 2011, we got confirmed and formalized ourselves as an official children and youth constituency to the UNFCCC. And now we're called Youngo, which is the youth NGOs. And then the next slide, please. So just to define about our mission and vision a little bit, Youngo as a constituency is open for any young person or child that is under the age of 35. There is no starting limit, but any young person under the age of 35 can join the constituency by filling out a simple Google form. And we are focused on awareness raising on climate change, and I will be talking about our various working groups, which are also thematic and cross-cutting to the climate negotiations, but also on the interest of young people and children and their advocacies. And we also recognize that knowing about the climate crisis is a question of privilege, and it should not be. So we are working a lot on capacity building, and we are working a lot and trying to move forward with language justice so that we have this capacity building, awareness, and knowledge sharing in a linguistically inclusive manner. We have a huge focus on policy and advocacy, and we believe a lot in youth action and working together in the constituency to achieve the rights-based language in climate negotiations, but also the policies that are inclusive for children and young people. The vision is, of course, to create a society that everyone is living in harmony with nature and the planet, and an empowered youth generation who is driving meaningful and impactful engagement and participation at the UN and other engagement areas, and also having a seat at the table for young people and for children to having their voices heard. And next slide, please. So just to describe our role as a constituency under the broader United Nations Framework Convention for Climate Change. So as I mentioned that there are like 9 major groups. So there is a constituency for every single one of them. And Youngo is the one that is focused on children and young people. We are not an organization. So we are not having this legal structure of an organization, but we are really a constituency to the UNFCCC, meaning that we have this formal place under the UNFCCC policies and processes, where we participate and also give our policy inputs as well. There are further 8 more constituencies, for example, on Indigenous people, women and gender, and farmers, among many others. And then next slide, please. So the participation of Youngo in the UNFCCC is really at consensus basis, given that we are 1,000+ organization and 10,000+ members in the constituency. It's really important for us that we have a flat structure, everybody's voices are heard, and every single young person who's joining as volunteer, and as a matter of fact, we are all volunteers. So who is joining and giving their time to make the climate policies more youth sensitive and child sensitive, their voices are heard basically. So we have an equal voice in the constituency, and also we are the oldest and the largest UN constituency, formal UN constituency that exists. So next slide, please. And this is the slide which I also talked about initially before. So our focus is really on awareness raising, knowledge and capacity building, and really we do it on platforms such as our mailing lists, and also different online calls and webinars. But we are also very defined in our local conferences and global conferences and regional conferences of youth, the L-COIS, R-COIS, and G-COIS, if you have ever gotten an opportunity to attend one. And these are the conferences that happen before the COP, which is an annual climate negotiations for climate, organized by the United Nations Framework Convention for Climate Change. And under these conferences of youth that we organize, We work on youth inputs and children input at these local conferences that happen locally in any city or any area for that matter, and these regional conferences that we organize basically regionally. So for example, ARCOI Europe or ARCOI Latin America or ARCOI North America, then there is the global conference of youth that happens really before the COP, the conference of party, where we integrate everything, every single input and outcomes of the COIS. Of course, the work has been happening throughout the years. But given that this is the annual gathering for young people working in climate negotiations or advocating, and it's not really limited to just young people who are focused on climate negotiations, but really a broader avenue where climate activists and young climate activists and children climate activists are really welcome to join, because their input is also very important and crucial. So next slide, please. And this is some of the principles that I previously also talked about. We believe in collaboration, cooperation, and network, and policy and advocacy through our work. So it's not really limited to just working on these outcome documents, but really the aim of these outcome documents is to finally hand it over to the COP president during the conferences of parties. And also want to highlight that throughout the year, with our advocacy and work of different working groups, which I will be talking about at the future slides, and also with the conferences of youth, we are working very closer with the Conference of Parties presidency, which was formerly the UAE, and now it's going to be Azerbaijan, as the COP29 is happening in Baku in Azerbaijan. So we have been working with the COP presidencies very closely, given the formal structure that we have under the UNFCCC, and it's really important to have this synergies under the presidency to enhance the youth and children agenda and the work that they do at the conferences of parties. So next slide, please. And yeah, so this is probably my favorite one, because we come all together from different communities and different areas as young people and children, and probably don't even speak the same language, but we have one thing in common, which is our passion for climate action and our advocacy for climate action. And while working together throughout our cultural differences and many other differences, we really build this sense of community with each other, and it's like a climate family that we have at Yango, and it's really important that we have that sense going. Why am I highlighting it is that in the future slide I will be talking about the safeguarding policy and engagement of children in specific, and it's really crucial for us that the constituency is not just a structure for young people to think about how we can take the agenda forward for children and young people and keep thinking about just work, but their well-being and their safety and their well-being and safety is also a really huge point as well. So next point, next slide, please. Yeah, so this is to just show how we function as a constituency. We have two of the focal points, which are the only elected positions that we have. They are basically not the leaders or facilitators, given that we are a flat structure. They are the liaison to the UNFCCC for the constituency. And then we have the global coordination team, that is kind of the logistic and admin team, as you can think of it. And then we have different working groups. And then we have, of course, the bigger and most largest component of our constituency bubble, that is individuals and organization. That is all of us basically coming from any part or any organization. Even if we don't belong to an organization, you can sign up as well and engage at the constituency. So thank you. Next slide, please. So now comes to the most substantive part, I think, about my slide, which is discussing how we basically work in the constituency, right? I mean, we have a flat structure and we are coming from different parts of the world and everything, but what do we actually do? So what basically happens is that we work through different working groups. And now these working groups are really thematic to the UNFCCC, but also cross-cutting on the topics that young people and children want to work on. So for example, as you see, the Action for Climate Empowerment, which is a negotiation agenda item under the UNFCCC, or gender, or for example, loss and damage. But then there are also working groups that are not official agenda items, but young people feel a really crucial need to be working on these topics. For example, human rights, for example, health, and for example, conflict of interest, among many other. The constituency have been really vocal about everyone having equal right and everyone having safety at the UNFCCC conferences of parties and the intersections. And we have been very active at the AIMS negotiation, which is Arrangement for Intergovernmental Organizations and Meetings. And then we also have operational working group, but that is basically how we organize ourselves with our work, like the conferences of youth that I mentioned already, the local conference of youth, the global conference of youth, and the regional conference of youth. And then we have our communications working group that is really focused on communication and social media. And then we have our awareness working group that takes care of the safeguarding and awareness of the constituency. If something happens, any reporting has to take place, they have to go through that. And then we have our policy working group and our engagement working group, as well as our action working group, which might be a really weird word because this is full of real much action. But the action working group is basically the working group that is organizing protests and mobilization of young people during the conferences or parties. And that is registered under the UNFCCC. So of course, nothing outside of that. So the next slide, please. And this is to show a little bit about our membership distribution. As I mentioned, that we are at 10,000 plus individuals and 1,000 plus organizations, and anyone can officially enroll in Youngo by filling out the Google form that is given, of course, anyone under the age of 35. And then the next slide, please. And now we talk about like the most important bit, I think, for this section, that is children engagement. Before I start with this part of my session, of this part of my slide, I really want to highlight that we really believe in Youngo that even if this is a children youth constituency, children needs to be having this sense of agency and support from young people. We need to be sharing our privilege, because then young people have this privilege and have this space since very long, of course. And it's important that we recognize that children are disproportionately affected. Children have differentiated needs, and children are vulnerable when it comes to these engagements at these bases, for example. So we will talk about how we're handling all of this in the next slide. So just to highlight that children are already a part of our membership. There is a portion of our membership that is consistent of children. But really our priority is that we put in specific safeguards to protect children and their engagement, for example. So right now, actually, we are in the second phase of consultation regarding our safeguarding policy that we have been making in consultation and with advice of many professional safeguarding officers. And we are working also on the children's rights working group. That working group is focused on really engaging children, finding a space for them where, for example, if it's an online meeting, how they should be engaging, for example, how they should be safeguarded and how they should be like protected, for example, and the consent and everything. And then, as I really mentioned about the aim to build the environment of agency and safety. And the other thing to highlight also is that the documents and the policies that we work with from the UNFCCC or wider UN are really technical. They are not super understandable for well, anyone, unless you give them a good amount of your brain. So we are really trying to make sure that the documents and the language that we work on, or the policy proposals that we work on, are really child friendly. So given that, of course, we have human resource constraint because all of us are volunteers, we are moving forward towards that very slowly, but surely we're moving forward. And what we have achieved recently is really say child-friendly version of our global youth statement. That is the final outcome document of our conferences of youth that we hand over to the COP president. And some of the major decisions, for example, having a youth envoy for under the presidency is also a result. For example, having the word intergenerational equity is one of Youngo's achievement under the UNFCCC, and we fought really much for it during the negotiations in Paris. And also now the first ever focused decision on children and young people that came that came under during the Glasgow COP was also one of the achievements that we would be happy to share. Well, there are many, but of course we have limited time, and I also want to hear you all as well and talk about different things. And maybe later on in the later part of my intervention, we can talk about right to a healthy environment and how Youngo has been engaging there. So yeah, I just ended there, and thank you so much. The next slides are about our social media because I think that's super cool. So follow us on social media if you want. And yeah, let's follow the work that we do. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Saher. That was amazing to hear that really comprehensive introduction to Youngo, to your work, to the mechanisms behind the work that really create the framework to make all of this happen. So thank you so much. And in listening to both of you, it's so clear that there's a chronology to this work, and that it's very cyclical. So ensuring that children have access to nature and build a connection to it from a very young age, it really encourages them to grow up to be environmental advocates, environmental stewards, active in organizations and constituencies like Youngo, and active in their own professional spheres. And then when more young people, young professionals are active in the policy world, they really invest in children's rights, and they really come back to ensuring that other young people have access. So there's a real chronology and a real cycle. And I'd love to hear, Ryan, I'd love to hear your thoughts on how you make that connection in your work, Saher as well. And then I'd love to open it up to questions from the audience. Please share your questions in the chat. We can take a few questions from the audience. But maybe Ryan and Saher, you can speak a little bit.
Sure. I would say nature grounds our work in everything we do. It grounds us mentally, physically, spiritually. It is the reason why we do the work. You know, it's not, when we talk about conservation, especially in the United States, we often refer to legislation. We talk about the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, the Endangered Species Act, talk about these bills that were passed in the 70s. Like, talk about all this federal infrastructure that we employ in Texas in order to protect these incredible natural resources. A lot of people don't realize just how beautiful the state of Texas really is, and how incredible the land is. So it's really interesting right now. We've been leaning on legislation that's been around for over 40, 50 years, and we haven't really passed anything in our own state to protect our natural resources. And so my hope for Texas is that we build a framework where conservatives and progressives can work together to identify the things we really care about in the conservation movement. And I don't think they're necessarily an individual species or a specific target metric. They're more like, we want to protect all of the rivers and streams in the Texas Hill Country, and we want to do it because they're worth protecting. We also want to guarantee that kids have access to a Texas that's as wild and rugged as the one we inherited. These broad vision statements bring people into the tent. And so, for me as a conservationist, my work is rooted and how can I connect with the outdoors? I just celebrated my 1-year anniversary with Katie, and she wanted to go climb a mountain. So we went to Guadalupe Peak in west part of Texas, the largest mountain in the state. And, you know, it just renews me. It fills me up so I can provide work for the conservation movement here in the state of Texas. So it's everything, in short.
And Saher, how about you? How do you see that, you know, maybe young people, your peers in Youngo, your peers in the other work that you do, have they grown up in an environment that fosters this connection to nature or not? And how do you see that they're reinvesting in children's rights to outdoor access and children's rights to connect with nature, as you mentioned?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. It's definitely given an opportunity to further build on what we talked about, but with the lens of more how much my young peers from indigenous communities are doing, for example, right? Because they are all they know is nature, right? It's all of our home, but they grow up with that knowledge and also the tools to further also share with us as well. And something that our colleagues from the Indigenous Working Group are doing is really to share this knowledge with all of us, which is super important, but also in specific to the children. There are projects, well, we call it like climate solution projects by young people, and these have been supported by the Youth for Climate. So basically they are projects by young people focused on how they can build on many different thematics, but the one that I'm specifically talking about are from, for example, the indigenous communities that are focused on how they can build back their relation with land and with nature justice. For example, taking tools, for example, the right to a healthy environment in mind, right? Access to clean, healthy, and safe water, for example, that the right to a healthy environment resolution mentions in specific in mind, and all of those things, and just making sure that these needs, when they're implemented on ground, are not leaving behind children is just so important. And this is the work that they're really extensively focused on, for example. And we have been working very closely with the coalition that advocated for the right to a healthy environment adoption. And one thing that we have always been always been super careful about when we are advocating or submitting any language is that that language has to be justified when the new members of Youngo come, and they're from children and future generations, so that they can see how we try to protect their rights, their right to nature, and their right to clean, healthy, and safe environment, basically. So all of those things, of course. And one thing other than that, that is also very important is having more and more the conferences of parties that take place, having more and more conferences with an increased number of children, so that they can find an opportunity to come there and see that space and make their voices heard, for example, because a lot of these children are coming from a really like unbiased opinion, for example, right? Because when a child is speaking about nature, they do not think about anything else but how their right of existence might be compromised, how their right to play might be compromised, right? And I know in specific a young girl who is really working forward on citizen science, and they are monitoring clean air in their area, and they're living in townships, so they're basically conducting this research, going to different parks and in their area with a group of girls, and then monitoring and collecting this data, and then sharing it with for example, the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and and toxic chemicals. So I mean, there is work going on, of course, but it's definitely not just enough, because if you look at how much work is happening like on ground in implementation, there are only 34% of the nationally determined contributions that are focused on children and young people, or talk anything about children and young people for that matter, if you don't even track the ambition of it. And nature justice, nature and also land and safe water and clean air are one of the top priorities that this data have been, looking at while making the research about children and young people. And this data is by UNICEF NDC's analysis. And happy to post the link later on. And it's really an eye-opening document about how much we talk about children and young people being the major portion of the society, or the growing portion of the society, and children being the most disproportionate portion of society, but still so little when it comes to implementation. So it's all of those facts. But yeah, thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Saher. We'll take there's one question in the chat that we'll take, and then I'd like to invite Heather Culkin, the co-chair of Nature for All USA. She wanted to share a brief video to wrap up the session. So if you want to tee that up, Heather, we'll take the question in the chat. So for Ryan and Saher, asking about advocacy rights of children to express their views. What are you doing in marginalized communities in the global South? And there's another question. We'll just go ahead and share that. And maybe Saher and Ryan, you can answer both. Sarah asks, what are the potential roles for children in informing policies and strategies, or even local level implementation of the NBSATs? So would you maybe Ryan and then Saher, you could take a turn at those questions.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just simply say with the first question, there's very little happening in Texas with regards to this. One thing I will mention is that I have discovered that in places of power, whether it's at the legislature in Austin or in the county commissioner's court in Comal County, when you talk about childhood, you actually bridge a gap. So I'm in a very conservative area of Texas, and very few people in positions of power are interested in talking about climate change, are interested in talking about the environment. But when you talk about their childhood, I remember I was in a meeting with the commissioner, and we were talking about hunting as a kid, learning how to go hunting. And he teared up. He teared up during that conversation. Somebody who would otherwise have absolutely no interest in conservation was brought to tears by the idea that kids wouldn't experience the same kind of childhood that he did. And so, frankly, no, we're not talking about the advocacy for children to express their views in positions of power in Texas, and we should. But I will tell you that I think the more we employ the idea of children being impacted by this work, which Saher mentioned so well, the greater impact we will have in bringing people together in the state of Texas to solve these issues. And with regards to having children inform our strategies and policies, I remember working in Austin. It happened. There were moments where young people were invited to serve on boards, that young people were invited to, whether it was advisory or as the actual board of directors, they were invited to participate. And so more of that work needs to happen. And, it definitely will play a role in the way that we work to preserve what's left of Texas.
So maybe
thanks so much. Yeah. Maybe Saher, your perspective, your kind of global perspectives on the question.
Yeah, thank you. So maybe if I can just answer the second one real quick by Sarah, who was asking about the how children are informed by in the policies and strategies. And I think that in specific with the biodiversity framework, I think that it's really important to just go back to the fact that not all of these documents and policy avenues are super inclusive of children or understandable by children. And this is why one of the things that we are doing, for example, in the constituencies, to make these documents more understandable for children. If you happen to know about the General Comment 26 to the CRC, I think that it's also a good example, because it is the document that mentions for the first time ever children's rights to be heard, right? And that is children's right to be at the decision-making avenues as well, having a seat and making their voices heard. And I think that there are all of those advocacy tools that we can take forward and to make this point, of course. But then what is actually happening, for example, for the nationally determined contribution documents, which are like the local documents to achieve the Paris Agreement, that is something I can talk about. And that is what is exactly, for example, us as a constituency are doing, is really to have children part of the conferences, like the regional, global, and local conferences that we organize, part of them, so that their inputs are there once they are handed over to the decision maker at COP, or their party delegates, their country delegates at the negotiations. So it has their voices, so they can see what the children wanted. Of course, this is not enough. And I recognize that these are sweet words, right? I recognize that this seems really different on ground, and children's rights voices are impacted very much on ground. But this is something that at least us as young people are doing to share the privilege that we have, because we recognize that we are at a privileged situation. So really want to just open the spaces for children voices and share this with the fellow children. And then the first question, which was about what are we doing, for example, in marginalized communities in the global south. It's really about, like, the first thing that came to mind is really that the Youth for Climate solution, call for solution, applications, for example, that is a fund application for young people from the global south in specific, to fund their climate solutions. And then this is the second cycle that will be running. And then the other thing that come to mind is also, for example, the Climate Promise program by UNDP, from where a lot of the young people at Youngo as well worked on nationally determined contributions in implementation, and also in the planning phase as well with their national government. But also to say that the main focus is to, I mean, I come from Pakistan, right? And I started my advocacy back there as well. So it really has to do with language justice a lot, when you're trying to include the young people from marginalized communities or children from marginalized community, and how you can include them basically in their language is really important, I think. And just wanted to highlight that, and just wanted to say that this is something that we're trying to work on. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Saher. And there's some comments in the chat about ensuring that as we work with children, that we are focusing on education and focusing on ways to restore the connection with nature and the love for nature, and that children from a young age shouldn't necessarily need to assume the role of advocates. That should really fall on the adults. But I think that organizations like Youngo really bridge that gap. So they really provide a really wonderful kind of fertile ground for education, for teaching young people, young professionals, easing them into the world of advocacy and of the professional and policy responses that they need to be prepared for, in their professional lives. So I think that there's a really nice kind of bridge that's created there with organizations like constituencies like Youngo. And I do want to highlight that really the fostering a love of nature, inspiring a love of nature is what is the main goal of the Nature for All movement, and is increasingly really an objective of the commission of IUCN's Commission on Education and Communication, looking at ways that education systems, both formal, non-formal and informal education, including learning environments and curricula, can work to bring nature back into education and really support that reconnection with and love of nature. So we are doing a lot, and experts within the CEC are doing a lot to move forward the nature-based education initiative in lots of different ways. So if you'd like to, some of the CEC members are on the call today. And if anyone on the call would like to know a little bit more about that, I'll put our email address in the chat and you can feel free to connect with us. Wonderful. And Shem in the chat shared some ways that youth in Kenya are mobilizing school children to restore degraded forests. That's such, yeah, it's a nice, you say that it's an example of youth advocacy, but I would also say it's really an example of nature-based education and even citizen science and citizen conservation. There's so many, that's a beautiful story. So thank you for sharing that. Wonderful. I'm not seeing any additional questions in the chat. Maybe I'd like to let Ryan and then Saher say a few closing remarks, any follow-up invitations for follow-up with the members of the call, if you'd like to share that. And then I invite the Nature for All US co-chair Heather Culkin to share a brief video.
Sure. I'll just quickly express my incredible gratitude for everyone on the call and for the work that you do. You know, my motivation in protecting the natural systems here in Texas really centers around providing opportunities for kids to fall in love with nature. The reality is every generation of Americans signs an unwritten agreement to protect all of the natural spaces that we assume are protected forever, whether it's Yellowstone or Yosemite or the Grand Canyon. You know, for the first time in my generation's history, and I think the history of America, we actually lost federally protected land. We cannot take for granted the protections that are currently in place. And so the meeting where children in nature and conservation efforts meet is really when we pass the torch to the next generation of people that are going to carry this work forward. If we don't inspire them to do this work, then all of the conservation efforts we do today are for naught. So those are my thoughts. And I'd welcome anyone to reach out to me, Ryan at comalconservation.org. Again, just grateful for all of you.
Thanks so much, Ryan. And thank you for your time on this call and sharing the perspectives from Texas that draw from a lot of global lessons, but also inspire them. So thank you. Thanks for your work. Saher, would you like to say a few closing remarks?
Yeah, I would just want to say that thank you so much for your time today. And I think that really shows that our dedication to this agenda, I guess. And what I really want to say, like as the closing remarks, is really that it's important we recognize that children are the agent of change. They know what they're doing, of course, and it's really important that we support them in whatever they want to do with their rights to nature and with whatever, of course, they're not supposed to be advocates, but if they want to be learning more about climate change and maybe advocating more, for example, at their classes and at their schools about climate action, or what smaller steps that we can take. And I think that we should all share that common responsibility and support them so that we all can have a better informed future for every single child. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Saher. Just another really warm and sincere thank you to Ryan Spencer, Saher, Rashid, Baig. Thank you so much for your time and for sharing your expertise on the topic. And I'd like to turn the floor over to Heather Culkin, the Nature for All US co-chair.
Hi, everyone. Thank you guys so much for being here, and thank you to Ryan and Saher. It's just so inspiring to hear the work that you're both doing. And I wanted to share with you something that Nature for All focuses on most heavily, and that's helping people fall in love with nature. And that love of nature is the basis for all of conservation. And if we can teach from a perspective and lead from a perspective of hope, then when we give children the chance to be advocates if they would like to, they can feel agency to act in that hope. And I think that's where change happens, is when kids can feel hopeful about a future that they want to go to. So I have a video, a very, very short video. It's about 15 seconds of a 3-year-old watching the bats fly out from the bridge in Austin. And we have the largest urban bat colony in the world in Austin. And so I thought that this love of nature video would be a nice way to end our time. So see if I can share my screen here.
Oh my gosh. Oh my God. We got this fatty. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Whoa, it's going to the sun. Oh,
So just a short little video. I hope you guys could hear her voice. Oh, now it's going to keep playing over and over. So it's just having the privilege of connecting people to nature as my job and inspiring people to fall in love with nature as really the end goal of every day is just really incredible and rewarding. And I'm so glad that all of you are here and that you're all doing this work to connect people to nature and advocate for climate adaptation. And I just am so grateful for all of you being part of Nature for All and joining us today. So I'm not sure if Natalie or Jose would like to say anything else, but please consider joining Nature for All if you haven't already. We'd love to have you and get together with you and see what collaborative projects we can do together.
Thank you so much, Heather, and for all of your work co-chairing Nature for All US, to the Global Nature for All team, to Ryan and Saher, thank you so much for giving us a window into your worlds. And everyone who joined today, thanks so much. We'll be sharing the recording after the session so you can share it with friends who might have missed the session. And please stay in touch. Thank you.